I'm bringing this up for three reasons. First, because organizations often misunderstand turnover. Leaders tend to assume people leave mostly for money or better titles or outside opportunities. And while those things matter, they're often not the deepest reasons people walk away. The second reason is because employees usually do not leave suddenly. Long before they resign, something has often already changed in their relationship to the work, the leadership, or the culture. And by the time they physically leave, they may have been emotionally leaving for months. And the third reason is because when leaders misunderstand why people leave, they end up solving the wrong problem. They focus only on compensation, recruiting, or even replacement, while missing the leadership and cultural conditions that keep pushing people out. Why me? I'm a psychotherapist and an executive performance coach, founder of EPC Leadership, Executive Performance Coaching. I work with leaders in organizations where retention issues are often treated like market problems, when in reality, they're frequently trust or communication, alignment, and leadership problems playing out over time. So, in this video, I want to unpack why employees really leave companies, what leaders often miss before people walk away, and what turnover is often trying to tell an organization about itself. So, employees usually do not leave for just one reason. One of the biggest mistakes leaders make is looking for a single explanation. They'll often say things like it's money, or they got a better offer, they wanted growth, or the timing was off, or they're burned out, or they're not a right fit. And so sometimes those explanations are true at the surface, but most employees do not leave because of one thing alone. They leave because a series of experiences gradually changed how they connected or felt supported, seen, and hopeful they feel in the organization. And so, compensation may be the final trigger. A new opportunity may be the visible reason, but underneath that, there's often a longer story. And it's a story about not feeling valued, often not about feeling heard, not trusting their leadership, not seeing a future, not wanting to keep carrying this emotional cost of staying. And that is why turnover has to be understood more deeply. Because if leaders only pay attention to the final reason someone gives in their exit interview, they're often going to miss the conditions that made the employee ready to go in the first place. Because people often leave long before they resign. And this is one of the most important things for leaders to understand, is that employees frequently leave psychologically before they leave formally. They start caring less. They'll stop raising concerns. They'll stop bringing in new ideas. They stop hoping things will improve. And they'll often become quieter or more detached or less invested. They're still performing. They're still looking stable on the outside, and they still may say the right things. But internally, the relationship has started breaking down. And that breakdown usually happens through accumulation. And so a leader who doesn't listen, a culture that feels political, or there's repeated disappointments. I've heard things like a lack of recognition, poor communication comes up, unclear expectations is a big one, and unrecognizable growth path, and too much emotional strain with too little support. So eventually something's going to shift. And the employee stops asking things like, how do I make this work? And starts asking, how much longer do I want to stay? And so by the time resignation happens, the decision's often much older than the leadership realizes. I talk about feeling unseen, and that's one of the biggest reasons people leave. There's a lot of turnover begins when people no longer feel seen in a meaningful way. And so that doesn't just mean they want like praise, and it doesn't mean they want their efforts or contribution to be recognized. People leave when they feel like what they carry is invisible. And so they're leaving when their work is only noticed when something goes wrong. And so they leave when they give a lot and feel increasingly unimportant or interchangeable. They'll leave when leadership benefits from their effort without really seeing the person behind it. That's a big one. And this matters because being unseen is not just like a moral issue, it changes the relationship. And if I feel unseen long enough, I stop wanting to give as much. And if I feel unseen long enough, our relationship's going to start to thin. And if someone is seen unseen long enough, another opportunity will start to feel like it's less risk and more of a relief. And so leaders often underestimate that because they think recognition is optional or even secondary, and it's actually not. Because people can tolerate a lot when they feel respected and seen. And when they don't, their attachment to the organization is going to weaken much faster. They also tend to leave when the support's too thin. So we'll talk about burnout. But another reason is that when they're not supported, it doesn't mean being coddled. It just means that what is needed to do the job in a meaningful or substantial way isn't there. So people leave when the expectations are high, but there's maybe low guidance. And they leave when the workload is unreasonable and no one is addressing it. Or they're asked to absorb constant pressure without enough clarity or purpose or resource or leadership presence. Or when the problems are obvious, but the leaders keep acting as if more resilience from their employees is the answer. And they leave when managers are too absent, or there's too much inconsistency, or there's too much reactivity, or too disconnected to provide any meaningfulness. And so the kind of environment wears down people. Even highly capable employees eventually begin questioning and asking, why am I doing this? Why am I doing it alone? Why does everything feel harder than it should be? And why am I expected to keep performing in a way that's not actually being supported? And that's when turnover starts to become more likely. Because people don't leave jobs, they leave chronic strain, stress that no longer feels worth enduring it. Earlier, I mentioned disconnection from leadership, and that can drive people out. A lot of employees leave because they no longer feel connected to leadership or even to the culture around them. And that's true when there's a gap between what the organization says and what it feels like to work there. And so the company says it values people, but employees feel disposable, or we value honesty, the corporation says, but truth is often ignored or punished, criticized. The company could say things like, we value development, but growth is unclear, or there's a lot of political atmosphere going on. And everybody says they value collaboration, but then the people experience decisions as being territorial, or something happens in the trust as well. So over time, that gap is going to create a strain, and people can tolerate imperfection. I think what's harder to tolerate is misalignment, and misalignment between the stated culture and the lived one, because eventually the employee starts observing that as like, I can't believe this anymore, or I can't trust what so-and-so said, or I don't feel connected like I used to. And this no longer feels like somewhere I want to keep investing my time and self. And that disconnection is truly powerful psychologically. And it doesn't show up in your spreadsheets immediately, But it does shape whether people imagine a future with your organization or they begin imagining an exit. Another top push out is poor communication. Communication failures are one of the most consistent drivers of turnover. People leave when they do not know what is happening. They leave when priorities keep changing and there's no explanation. And they leave when major decisions are made around them instead of with clarity. And they also leave when they hear these polished messages but experience confusion consistently. And so poor communication creates more than frustration. It's going to create insecurity in people. They start asking, like, what's going on? Why are we just now finding this out? We don't trust you. Am I being set up here? Or I am being set up to fail? And why does this feel like things are always changing and reality is always arriving late? That uncertainty is going to drain commitment. And it also weakens trust because communication is one of the main ways organizations signal respect. And when people feel included in reality, even if the reality is difficult, they tend to stay more connected. And when they feel managed through, we'll say, selective information or vague messaging or silence, they're going to start pulling back. And eventually, some of them leave not just because of what's happening, but because of how it's being handled or what's not happening. And so that emotional safety matters, I think, more than most people realize, because employees leave when the environment stops feeling emotionally safe. And it doesn't mean that we need to make sure everybody's always comfortable. It just means that our employees need to feel that they can speak honestly, that they can raise concerns and make mistakes, and they can disagree or bring reality into the room without excessive relational cost. And when that is not true, people start protecting themselves. They become careful. They're editing what they say. They're going to stop bringing problems to the surface. They avoid honest conversations and they stop bringing themselves fully forward in investing. And over time, if the culture continues to feel this intensity or punitiveness or overly political, people decide it's easier to leave than to keep adapting to that environment. And so this is one of the areas I think leaders miss the most, is that they think turnover is about maybe ambition or compensation, when in reality, some of their employees are just simply exhausted by having to manage themselves so carefully all the time. And the cost of staying becomes emotional and it takes its toll. And it's just not practical for them anymore. And once that emotional cost gets high enough, people begin looking for somewhere else that feels clearer or safer and I think more workable. And the other piece here I think is important is that employees leave managers, not companies. And this is a familiar phrase, but I think it remains true for several reasons. A lot of people do not leave the organization in, we'll say, the abstract, right? They leave the leadership experience they're having every day. They leave managers, they leave leaders, they leave executives who are inconsistent or reactive or create anxiety or confusion. They leave supervisors who are not coaching, who don't listen, who don't protect the team. They're going to leave environments where the local leadership experience makes the broader organization hard to stay connected to. And that matters because organizations sometimes try to solve the turnover with like employer branding or perks or messaging while ignoring that lived leadership reality employees are inside of every day. But the everyday manager often is the culture for that employee. The direct leadership relationship shapes trust, safety and clarity and growth and purpose and belonging more than anything else. So when people leave, leaders need to ask not just what the company offers, but what is the day-to-day leadership experience employees are actually having. And that's often where the real answer sits. I often get a lack of growth or a future alignment makes it harder to stay with a company because employees leave when they no longer see a future. And sometimes that means a lack of promotion, but I also think it's other things like, I don't know where I'm going here. I don't see how this role develops me. I don't think leadership's investing in me. I feel stuck is a big one. And I don't feel aligned with where the organization's headed. And that matters because people need more than a role. They need some sense that staying continues to make sense. And so we encourage people, we give them the resources so that they can do that, but we need to make sure we're doing that. Because when growth is unclear, and when development is maybe political, or when the organization doesn't communicate kind of a believable future, employees are going to start losing their attachment to the company and then eventually to their role. And you can lose especially strong employees because high capacity people tend to notice the stagnation early. If they don't see challenge, support, recognition, or their purpose and trajectory, they're going to start considering other options much sooner. And so that's why retention is not just about fixing the pain, it's about building enough future for people to want to stay connected. And I think what leaders also often miss when people leave is that turnover usually sends signals before it happens. So there's some signals that you can look for. You look for people who are now quiet, or maybe they're less candid. You notice an energy shift. They stop initiating, or they stop imagining improvements, or they're disengaged from relationships that actually used to matter. So sometimes leaders see these signals and misread them as like, an attitude problem, but they're not attitude problems. They're actually pre-exit behaviors. And there are signs that employees are protecting themselves. And we protect ourselves by detaching and avoiding. Or we protect ourselves by losing the belief in the relationship. And this is why leaders need to get more curious earlier. It's often the question comes too late is why did they leave? We need to look at the what's, like what changed before they left. What did they stop perceiving here? What did the environment, start costing them? What truth about the workplace were we not seeing that they were? Those are much more helpful questions because they help leaders understand retention as an ongoing relational and cultural issue. It's not an end HR event. And so what makes people stay, if you truly want to understand that, you have to understand why employees leave, and you have to understand what makes them stay. So being seen, respected, supported, included, you have trust and autonomy, they're feeling developed, they're connected to meaningful, purposeful work, and they're led by people they can believe in. That does not mean every day is like that. It means the organization feels worth the effort, and that's a building on component. And people stay in imperfect environments all the time, especially when trust is real, at least, and communication is honest, and leadership is honest and steady, and it feels meaningful. They will leave when the opposite is true. And so retention is not just about reducing dissatisfaction, it's about building a workplace where people can stay connected to without losing much of themselves in the process. And so that's really the deeper question I'm asking you to consider. So let's look at the takeaway, right? So employees don't leave just because of compensation or title or outside opportunity. They often leave because something in leadership, in the culture, in the communication, or the emotional environment has made staying feel less connected, less supported, less safe, less worthwhile. And by the time they resign, that process has usually been building for some time. So if you're a leader trying to understand your turnover, don't just ask what people are leaving for, ask what they may have been leaving from long before they formally walked away. Because retention is not just built only through pay or perks, it's built through trust and support and communication and clarity, psychological safety, and leadership people can remain connected to over time. I'm Paul Sheesley, and this is the kind of leadership work I care most about, where retention, psychology, culture, and organizational health all come together in real time. Thanks for listening.